The House Beneath the Vines, Episode 1. Welcome to Huber Falls. I trundled along the broken Ohio backroads in my aging silver SUV, headed toward a town called Huber Falls. A place I didn't grow up in, but one I had the displeasure of visiting from time to time as a kid. It was my great-grandmother's hometown. She inherited the land her house sat on sometime around the era when Jesus was still passing out loaves and fish. Perched on a hill at the edge of town and surrounded by dense forest, the place had been hers for nearly her entire life. We'd visit during holidays and special occasions. She told the strangest stories and collected the weirdest junk that you've ever seen. As a kid, I loved it. My cousins and I would disappear into the woods for hours. We'd also explore the crazy house she lived in, a place that always seemed to be undergoing some kind of renovation. Every time we came back, the layout felt different. A wall moved. A hallway stretched somewhere new. A door appeared where there hadn't been one before. Rooms were added, others vanished. But one thing never changed. The kitchen. It was small, cluttered, packed with old appliances and jars full of things that probably had no business still existing. Anything that wasn't tucked inside a cabinet lived beneath a thin layer of cigarette ash and stale smoke. My great-grandmother would sit at the little bar island in the center of the room with a filterless cigarette in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. Her voice sounded like gravel rolling down a hill. She'd tell us about the creatures that roamed the woods at night. Back then, I thought it was great. But when the letter arrived in the mail requesting my assistance in managing the estate, which is polite legal language for please clean your grandmother's junk out of the house so we can bulldoze the place, the nostalgia had been replaced with something closer to dread. Because suddenly I remembered the house a little differently. The maze of rooms, the way the hallways seemed to shift, and what it might feel like to walk through all of it, alone. I thought about the cellar, the one my cousins and I locked my youngest cousin in one summer afternoon. My great-grandmother nearly had a heart attack when she found out. She'd screamed at us like we'd kicked open the gates of hell. That cellar door was the only place in the house she seemed truly afraid of. And now the thought of going down there again made my stomach turn. I was never much a fan of the dark places, especially the kind that were probably damp, probably cold, and definitely full of spiders. Lost in thought behind the wheel, I barely noticed when the last familiar stretch of highway disappeared in the rearview mirror. Interstate 71 had long since faded behind me. Now the towns I passed through were so small they could barely field a baseball team. Their main streets were lined with restaurants that probably hadn't changed their menus or replaced their windows since the year the state was founded. Eventually, the road roughened beneath my tires. The highway gave way to neglected county pavement that looked like it hadn't seen a repair crew since the Reagan administration. The blasted strip of asphalt yawned before me like the tongue of some long-dead serpent, and with every pothole I struck, I whispered a quiet prayer for my tires. Out here, help wasn't exactly waiting around the corner. A row of aging sodium lamps stood at uneven intervals along the roadside, their metal poles leaned at crooked angles, their orange bulbs flickering weakly in the growing dusk. Lantern bearers who had forgotten who they were guiding. I was grateful a few of them still bothered to show up for work. Thick clouds hung overhead, pregnant with rain. They had followed me all the way from St. Louis, where this fool's errand had begun. 6 hours on the road, and not a single drop had fallen. Still, the sky loomed above me, swollen and heavy, threatening to burst at any moment. The clock on my dashboard read, October 21st, 2026, 5:48 p.m. But with the sky like this, it may as well have been midnight. I flicked on the headlights. Dead leaves skittered across the road ahead of me, chased by a restless autumn wind like they were fleeing town. In hindsight, maybe they had the right idea. The beams cut through the gloom, illuminating cracked pavement and a faded yellow center line that stretched endlessly into the gray distance. Eventually, the pavement gave up entirely, and my turn came sooner than expected. The tires rolled from blistered asphalt onto a one-lane dirt road bisected down the middle by a stubborn strip of grass that somehow survived on motor oil and rainwater. The forest closed in almost immediately. Trees leaned over the road like crooked sentries. their branches knitted together overhead, swallowing what little daylight had managed to slip through the clouds. The deeper I drove, the colder the air seemed to get. A final pothole announced itself with a dull thunk as the passenger side tire dipped into it and climbed back out again. My pack shifted in the seat beside me. I hadn't brought much. A few days' worth of clothes, a small survival kit I kept in the car, and the letter that had sent me on this journey. It rested beside the pack, sealed with a strange wax stamp. The image pressed into the seal showed 4 clusters of grapes hanging above a small altar crowned with the skull of a stag. I'd seen the symbol before, in the house, in my great-grandmother's kitchen, but I couldn't remember where. I glanced at the cracked leather upholstery beneath it. The seat looked like it was silently judging me. If he'd taken better care of me, I might look a little better, it seemed to say. Yeah, I muttered to no one. That makes 2 of us. My eyes flicked briefly to the rearview mirror, catching my reflection. Unshaven, tired, 30-something, going on 70. The kind of face you get when life decides to sand you down for a few years. I looked away before the mirror could start offering commentary. That was when something moved. A dark shape flashed across the road ahead. Time slowed in that strange way it does when your brain realizes something is wrong, but hasn't yet figured out how wrong. The only thought that formed was, how can something that large move that fast? Then, the world snapped back into motion. The impact hit like a sledgehammer. Metal screamed. The steering wheel jerked violently in my hands as something massive slammed across the hood. My front tire exploded with a gunshot crack and the SUV lurched sideways into the ditch. Grass and mud sprayed across the windshield. Then, everything stopped. The vehicle settled at a crooked angle, the engine coughing once before fading into the slow ticking of cooling metal. For a moment, there was nothing but quiet. No birds, no insects, just the wind shifting somewhere high in the trees. I realized that my hands were still locked around the steering wheel. I took a shuddering breath and eventually I forced them open. The door creaked when I pushed it. The air outside smelled like wet earth and distant rain. The front end of the SUV looked like it had been opened with a can opener. Deep gouges carved across the hood where something had raked through the metal. The driver's side tire hung in shredded ribbons. Whatever had crossed the road hadn't just clipped me, it had slashed me. I crouched beside the ditch where the grass had been flattened. At first, the tracks looked normal enough. A hoof print, large, but not impossible for something like a deer. But just beyond it, there was another impression pressed into the damp soil beside the hoof. I leaned closer. The shape was wrong. Too long, too narrow. And the marks at the end looked disturbingly like fingers. As if whatever had landed there had caught itself mid-stride with something that was almost, but not quite, a human hand. The first drop of rain struck the hood of the SUV, then another. Then the sky finally gave up the fight. I slowly straightened and looked toward the dark tree line where the forest swallowed the road ahead. And then, it started raining.